Hi, this is Andre. This video is going to look at both the technical and the conceptual signal flow aspects of my performing looping rig in its most basic state. Thank you very much to Steven Clements for commissioning this one. This is by no means intended to be the absolute objective be-all, end-all solution for everybody to use. This is just what I find useful in my own work, and because the way I use this stuff is a little idiosyncratic, I don't know how valuable this will be to anybody else, but Stephen asked me to talk about it, so I'm happy to talk about it. What we have here is probably the most bare bones rig in the most basic approach that I take, which is basically the Vox Tone Lab, which is an amp modeler. This gets sent into the Echoplex, and then the Echoplex gets sent directly into my computer for recording. Now, it's a mono signal from my guitar into the Tone Lab. It's a mono signal out from the Tone Lab into the EDP, and another mono signal from the EDP into the computer. When I do recordings with the EDP, I generally do some kind of processing afterwards to give it some kind of stereo imaging, whether it's reverb or some kind of stereo plug-in effect or something along those lines. One of the things I really like about using a hardware amp modeler, and this is going to sound a little counterintuitive, is that I can actually turn off the cabinet simulation. And here's what I mean. This is kind of my default clean looping sound. I'm going to build up a few things here, and it will probably sound kind of familiar. So if you've seen any of the videos over the last half year, wow, it's been a half year since I've been doing this. Wow. So if you've seen any of those videos over the last half year, this is the kind of tone I've been using. It's a pretty clean sound, but there's one crucial difference. There's no cabinet simulation. So let's talk about what that means. An amp modeler is basically designed to digitally model all the different components of an amplifier setup. So you have different amp types you can dial in, you have different speaker cabinets, you have different effect pedals, different types of modulation, reverb and delay, and all that kind of thing. The speaker cabinet on a guitar rig is not a flat frequency response thing. It's kind of like a very, very elaborate, very exotic, very complex bandpass filter. A lot of the sounds that are actually being produced by a guitar amp in the purest form are getting very heavily filtered out by the nature of a guitar cabinet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to dial in a few sounds that are using a cabinet. This is the cabinet switch. I generally have it off. Let me dial in a few sounds. I'm going to record a new loop from scratch just so you can hear what it sounds like with a guitar cabinet simulator engaged. Gonna dial in a different cabinet and overdub something. Feedback down to fade out a little bit. Now I'll do some harmonics. Bring feedback up, add in some percussive hits. Actually, turn it into 4/4. So that's with a cabinet simulator engaged. So by contrast, let me build up a new loop from scratch, and now I'm not going to have any cabinet simulation. This is with cabinet simulation turned off. Have a listen to how the sound is quite different. You can hear a lot more high and low end. And if I do a kick drum and add in a bass sound, that kind of idea. You can get a lot more frequency range out of the sound if you don't have a guitar cabinet simulator. Now, for some things, you absolutely do want a fuller frequency range. Let me dial in one of the generic presets on the Tone Lab. This is called Priest. If I turn off the cabinet simulation for that kind of tone, kind of a cool sound, but not very amp-like. So when I play solo, I generally do one of two approaches. I either use the Tone Lab going into the EDP, going into a PA, or I use a regular guitar amp and I put the Echoplex in the effects loop of the guitar amp. Now, the single biggest difference between using this and a regular guitar amp is that we were just talking about how you can turn off the cabinet speaker simulator in the Tone Lab. If you're using a real guitar amp, you can't really turn off the speaker. The speaker is a pretty big part of the guitar amp. So you're going to get that kind of coloration. You're not going to get the same kind of full frequency range with the extended high and low end frequencies if you're playing through a regular guitar amp. You do get a kind of a more lo-fi sound. It does sound more like a regular guitar. And you can almost get, in my experience anyway, kind of a low fidelity, kind of a vinyl-esque quality to the sound, especially if you have the tubes and the power amp working a little on the hard side. So I like both aspects of it, you know, depending on what kind of mood I'm in, depending on whether or not the venue I'm playing at has a PA that I could plug this into, or if I have to provide my own amplification. There have been times when I've dragged a guitar amp and run this in the effects loop and been happy. There have been times I've plugged this and the EDP into a PA and the house sound system and been happy with that too. Another thing I like about having this is that it has a lot of effects built in, and I don't use a ton of them, but one I do like using a lot is the octave pedal. We were hearing that a little while ago. So this number 2 preset here is pretty clean tone, no cabinet simulator. I have a bit of a compression effect built into it. This is the same basic patch with no compression. Not a huge change. This is the sound with the octave pedal effect. Can be a little glitchy, generally. I find it works best on the neck pickup. Playing with the side of the thumb and the tone knob rolled down. You can get some cool glitchy artifacts if you play more regularly. And now, of course, that I'm talking about it, it's not going to glitch out. Come on. Glitch for me. Come on. Oh, for God's sake. Okay. Well, doesn't feel like glitching right now. Okay. Fine, octave pedal. Let's wait until I have a really important gig and I want to get a really clear sound, and then you can glitch out. All right. Another thing I like about this approach is that it's extremely portable. I originally got the Tone Lab in 2005 because I was doing a series of performances at a 5.1 surround sound performance venue in New York City called The Monkey, which was run by genius guitarist Dominic Frasca. Dominic actually suggested that I play with 5 Echoplexes at the same time, and to him it just made sense. He said, well, you know, there's 5 speakers, we might as well have 1 Echoplex for each speaker. So I ended up doing that, and I ended up using this as the master source for the sound, and I ran the output from this into a channel splitter, and then took different outputs from that channel splitter and ran each of those outputs to a separate Echoplex. We'll get into the channel splitter a little later on. For right now, I'm kind of starting with the most bare bones approach that I take and then building it up from there. I don't use a ton of the effects that are built in here. You know, there's usually a bit of built-in spring reverb you can hear, which is just the digital model of the spring reverb. I'm not super picky about that stuff. It sounds fine to me. It's nice to have access to the octave button at the push of a button. There it glitches. Very nice. Oh, let's hear that again. Great. Snarling dog. I like it. Cool. Told you it glitched. Now, the other main disadvantage is that, as any red-blooded alpha male guitar player will tell you, there is a certain quality you get to a guitar amp, especially a tube guitar amp, pushing air that you don't generally get out of a PA sound. And when you look at people who are really into using modern guitar modeling devices, like the Axe Effects or the Kemper or the Helix or that kind of thing, this is one of the biggest issues the guitar players have, that even if you model the sound, it doesn't really have the same kind of feel that you get when you're blasting a loud guitar amp. Which for me is fine, because my conception of what I do with this stuff is not really about sounding like a conventional guitar player or using a conventional kind of guitar tone. Now, when I do play through an amp, when I do run this in the effects loop of an amp, I do get more of that sound naturally, just because I'm plugged into a regular guitar amp. So I suppose it's possible that maybe that colors the way that I end up playing. It could be that I end up doing stuff that's a little more overtly guitar-esque because it's a lot easier to access that kind of sound. So you're not going to get the same kind of effect of a huge screaming amp pushing air, but frankly, the huge screaming pushing air amp is not really something that's a big part of my general aesthetic as well. And even when I am plugged into a tube amp and running the Echoplex in the effects loop of an amp, I'm not generally getting this huge raging screeching tone. I like having enough natural amp compression from the preamp and the power amp so that things are a little squishy sounding and squishy feeling, but it's not the kind of thing where I need to get tons of power amp overdrive or that sort of thing. So there are aspects of this I really like. There are aspects that I like about plugging into a regular guitar tube amp. They're both going to have advantages and disadvantages. Sometimes it's a logistical question, depending on whether or not I'm going to have a PA at wherever I'm going to play at. Sometimes it's the logistics of recording a video right now at 12:35 in the morning and not wanting to wake up my neighbors with an actual tube guitar amp so I can record direct with all of this. Sometimes it just depends on what kind of mood I'm in, whether I feel like lugging an amp to the gig or if I want to carry this stuff. So certainly this does not replace a guitar amp, and if I use a guitar amp, that doesn't replace this. You know, there are aspects about both things that I like. The biggest one for me in the case of the Tone Lab is being able to deactivate the cabinet simulator so that I can get the full frequency response. Wow. So I can get the full frequency response as opposed to different cabinet sounds like these. These are nice sounds, but for what I do with looping, I tend to like a much fuller, less filtered sound. So this has been a look at my looping rig in its most basic bare-bones state. Thank you again very much to Steven Clements for commissioning this one. There's going to be more just around the corner, so please stay tuned, and until then, thank you so much as always for tuning in. I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.